Back to another video. Today I'm going to be doing another podcast. This is day number 10. Proud of myself for bringing this up for 10 days straight, even though it hasn't been like an ongoing loop, but it's potential. So let's get into this shit.
Trying to maintain this image externally. And part of that image is the perfectionist. So there's never any room for downfall. There's never any room for weakness. There's never any room for problems or issues. And so for a lot of men, it becomes something that they start to medicate. And usually that has rooting in childhood, right? That they had to be a certain way in order to garner love, to garner attention. So for a lot of super high performing men, they grew up in an environment where they kind of had to be perfect. And if they were perfect enough, then they would get affection, then they would get love, they would get praise, they'd get validation. And so for a lot of young guys, it's like a lot of men in general, it's if I can be perfect enough and I can perform well enough, then everything will be okay. But if that starts to falter just a little bit, then it says something about me personally. It means that something's wrong with me, and then shame starts to creep in, and they don't want anybody to know that that's happening. And so slowly over time, because they can't admit that there's something wrong, they can't admit that there's an issue, they can't sort of vocalize it, they start to medicate that shame, or they start to medicate the perceived weakness, the insecurity, the anxiety, with booze or weed or women or hookers or whatever it is, right? Whatever their sort of drug choice is, could be gambling or whatever. And slowly over time, that becomes the method that they need in order to just maintain homeostasis. And it's almost like there's a debt building in the background that's building over time. Every little mess up, every little screw up is just sort of accruing this massive debt inside of them. And eventually it just craters. And so, in a lot of ways, they need to be able to bring forward some of those weaknesses or insecurities or the anxieties or, the trauma that they've just been holding on for fucking decades, So I think that's a huge part of it. And I think for a lot of men, it's correlated to their sense of masculinity and their sense of manhood. So it's like, well, if I admit this weakness, if I admit that I'm struggling, then it means that there's something wrong with me as a man, that I'm less masculine. And I don't think that that's necessarily something that we think about top of mind. It's more performance at all costs. And so I don't want to admit that there's something going on behind the scenes.
Are you dieting but still picking meals loaded with a lot of unnecessary crap? Not fuel meals, just 4 clean ingredients, that's it.
As you're saying that, the word, I don't know why, but the word toxic masculinity came up. This actually feels like a kind of place that it suits in a bizarre sort of way.
Yeah.
That it's taking traits of masculinity and making them a performance, forcing yourself to perform. And it's a way, not that masculinity itself is toxic, which is what the current version of that is, that this is a way to turn your masculinity into something which becomes like a prison guard in a way that sort of locked you in jail for doing the non-masculine thing. And if you try, you can't necessarily break out of that. So the high-functioning guys are what the world rewards them for in public, they struggle with in private.
Correct.
High standards, hypervigilance, neuroticism, obsession, drive, desire for conquer and mastery, lots of competition, lots of comparison between myself and other people. That is a type of pressure. And that pressure causes them to set very high standards. And if they ever fall short of those standards, that causes pain. I am not enough because I have these high standards. These high standards are why I've managed to become so high functioning in the real world. I'm a hard charging sort of dude. But as fears about not being able to keep up with this work rate that I've already established for myself, my comparison group is getting better and more successful. I'm finding it hard. Like my physiology just can't keep up with the burnout level that I'm requiring of myself. All of these things build up. and there needs to be some sort of a release valve.
Yeah.
One of the release valves could be learning self-love, self-compassion, having somebody that you can speak to about this, a supportive partner who makes you feel safe and secure in your like vulnerabilities. But if you aren't prepared to do that, or you don't have access to that, you turn to something else, which is also like a pressure release valve. Is that a fair synopsis?
I think we could probably just summarize it by saying, and that this is something that I wrote about in my book years ago, which is that in male culture, it's very common that we teach strength through suppression. And for high-performing men, that is way over-indexed, right? So it's, I need to develop competency, capability, strength, whether it's physical, emotional, mental, in the boardroom, whatever, but I'm going to do that by suppressing the unsavory parts of myself. I'm going to suppress maybe it's empathy. I'm going to suppress that I'm exhausted. I'm going to suppress these types of things. And there's a cost to that suppression. And so, part of the hallmark of being a great man in society has always been your capacity and capability of suppressing certain things in certain moments so that you could go and do the thing that nobody else wanted to do, right? It's like Navy SEALs need to suppress certain things in certain moments so that they can get a job done. Same with CEOs and executives and athletes and yada, 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 right? So there's merit in that skill in being able to sort of say, I'm going to put this aside for right now so that I can get this done and execute on something. But for high performers, it's usually that is way overdialed. It's over-indexed. And the problem with that is that when some of those things that are being suppressed go undealt with, then it sort of amasses a ton of psychological energy, right? And so all of a sudden, you're having to keep down years of, I don't really like this fucking job, or I'm disappointed in this marriage, or this isn't really the way that I thought things would play out, or I feel ashamed of all of these little micro failures that aren't really a failure to external people, but for me it feels like this monstrous thing, and so all of a sudden this accumulation of all these suppressed emotions and disappointments and perceived failures start to mass, and that has a tremendous amount of energy, which then needs to be dealt with. And the problem is that how high-performing men have often been taught to deal with those things is that, we've sort of had this normalized culture of, drink it off, or, go rub one off and you'll feel better. And so how we try and hit the reset button on some of those suppressed emotions is usually maladaptive behaviors. They're not supportive. They don't help you feel better, right? It's like, you go and hire the hooker, or, you go and watch the porn, or you go and have a bender, and take some Molly and go to a rave. And then the next day you're like, fuck, I feel like shit now, And so it kind of compounds things over time. So a lot of high-performing men will go on this arc. And I think the other thing, maybe I'll just add one more wrench into the mix here, is many high-performing men have built high performance off of what I call shame-based motivation, dark motivation. And so part of their fuel source is they're trying to run away from the man that their father said they'd probably become. They're trying to run away from the shame or the pain that they experienced growing up. And so it's like, I don't want to be a failure at all costs, right? Or I fucking hate myself. And so I'm going to turn myself into this absolute beast that is incredible in many different ways. Or, he was like an insecure teenager or something like that. And so what happens for a lot of high-performing men is they're actually using shame as a fuel source. And how they get to a place of excellence is through self-deprecation. And this is very different for women. I thought, women don't generally use shame as a fuel source in the same way that we do, or pain in the same way that we do. A lot of men will use pain that they're carrying internally to actually motivate themselves towards a goal. And I'm sure you've seen this with so many people that have sat across from you, right? Where you start to hear about their story and you're like, holy shit. I mean, the stuff that you went through, the stuff you experienced. And so for a lot of high-performing men, what we do is we take that pain, we take that shame, we take that anger or that rage, and we use that as a fuel source for a period of time. And eventually what happens is it starts to have a net negative outcome. we sort of reach a tipping point where all of a sudden, I've worked with musicians where they get all the accolades and the awards, and they're like world famous rappers or whatever, athletes that win the Super Bowl, and then the crash comes. And why is that? Well, they've been using shame for so long to drive themselves that they've never developed an internal architecture of self-recognition, of real self-recognition. And so they've just tried to motivate themselves to success through shame and self-deprecation. And so when the accolades come, they can't actually enjoy it. They're not able to actually recognize that they've accomplished and achieved something meaningful. And so the whole time that they've been working, that they've been driving themselves and killing themselves and working towards this like big illustrious goal, all of a sudden it comes and they're not able to actually bask in the like, wow, I actually did that. And then the collapse happens, and that's when you see them just fucking crash out, and you see the TMZ stories and shit like that.
Is it a bad thing to use your pain as fuel?
No, I don't think so. I mean, this is the kind of catch-22 about it.
Feels like a paradox.
It is very paradoxical, and I've sat with this for a long time because I think in my own journey this is very much the same thing. I used my own pain, my own shame, my own sort of like rage towards the world to motivate myself for a period of time. And I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's if we don't build the counter tools to support ourselves, the generative tools to be able to appreciate, acknowledge ourselves, to be able to recognize ourselves for actually doing good, to be able to receive goodness in the moments where we actually accomplish something, that's when it becomes problematic. So it's not necessarily a bad thing to allow pain or shame to drive us and to motivate us. I think for some people, for a period of time, that's actually maybe necessary because they need to do something to disprove the internal story of I'm a piece of shit. I'm never going to amount to anything. I'm going to show that. I'm going to show dad. I'm going to show mom that whatever it is. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing. However, it has a shelf life. And if we don't develop the tools that are meant to go in tandem with it, it's always destined to fail, always destined to end in some type of a collapse.
Wanna buy your way? Wanna pre-qualify at the park? Woo!
I find this topic...
Like, look at the Roman Empire, they fell. Look at any single empire that rose and that fell to power. Look at them. What did they do? What did they try to understand? Any government, anything that has a quest for power will either succeed or fail. Same thing with business.
Like endlessly fascinating. I think it's so interesting. I had this one insight I've been thinking about recently, which is an infinite 1 rep max. So the idea that most people reach a particular level of pain, and that level of pain is maybe before a breakdown. Like the whole point of there being warning signs is that they warn you before the catastrophe occurs, right? You slow down before you get toward the cliff, not as you're going off the cliff and you hit the brake as you're going off the edge, right?
I mean, you could do that.
It's pointless, right? Like the whole point of the warning signs was to stop you from needing to go off the cliff in the first place.
Right.
And one of the things that guys are praised for, and women as well, especially meritocratic capitalist society, blah, blah. If you're able to suppress, if you're able to...
Like and subscribe. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.